Welcome to the People Strategy Forum. We're delighted to introduce Davina Stanley today. She is a master in making complex ideas clear. She's the author and founder of Clarity First. She's an author of many books. We're going to talk about those books in just a moment. But Davina's comes from a journey from rural Australia to high-stake boardrooms of global businesses, and it's nothing short of inspirational. So she spent her early days helping her on her family's farm, and also she grew and developed to shape businesses as a consultant for McKinsey in Hong Kong. So Davina has really harnessed her skill set and her experiences to really help a lot of those leaders out there really simplify and communicate that message effectively. So I mentioned she's an author of many books, and so the couple that we're going to be talking about today are specifically Elevate and Engage. So join us as Davina shares invaluable insights on elevating the quality of your team's reports and presentations and ensuring clarity leads to real business results. So welcome, Davina.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, as I often say, that what I really like to do when diving into these conversations is hearing a little bit about you. I mean, I know that you have a very interesting and incredible backstory, and so let's start with the early days on your father's potato farm. Can you tell us a little
hmm
bit about that?
Sure. So I started out on a very small one near a place called Hanging Rock, which in Australian terms is a little bit famous. There was a movie about that. And it's a beautiful spot just an hour or so out of Melbourne. And we had a small farm on really rich soil and right near where my father had lived as a child, and also where his ancestors had come from Cornwall to mine gold. So not far from that. And he found that the smog from Melbourne, the closest big city, was getting a bit too close. And so he wanted to move to get more land. So he moved quite a way away when I was about 4. And I grew up on a farm of about 800 acres, which in Australian terms is not terribly big. And it was land that, because of the advent of fertilizer, you could actually grow things on it. You wouldn't have been able to 100 years before at all. We had dirt roads, it was an hour and a half to school on the bus, so it was reasonably remote, although not really in an Australian setting. And so, yeah, I grew up pretty free, unencumbered by a whole lot of expectations that I think city kids are raised with, and, grew up with the idea that anything's possible. I just had no idea what that was, right?
Mm.
And so we were encouraged to really focus on our schooling. We weren't the kids who were taking days or weeks off to help with harvest or anything like that. But we did, get involved in grading potatoes, or, throwing fleeces for sheep, or, dagging fleeces. All right. Looks like Howard knows what that is, right? When you're taking the dirty bits off the fleece and chucking it away to, make sure it's clean before you scoop it all up and put it in a bale. So we did all those things. And I think, had really great conversations that were just part of our natural life,
Mhm.
Okay, so, we're negotiating with the company that we sell our potatoes to that makes potato chips. So, can we negotiate a farm gate price, or are they going to insist on a factory gate price, which is
Mhm.
better for us? So business strategy, or, the potato company has set out an edict that a certain percentage of the potatoes only may be bigger than that.
Oh,
And so therefore, how do you make sure you use all of your potatoes that are that maximal size and you don't waste them?
mm.
Well, what are the economics of that? And, so you make a ring of the size and you get someone to throw the potatoes through that look really big, and make sure all of the potatoes that are big enough fit, are
Yeah.
used, and tip them on top of the load. And then the potato chip company works out what you're doing. And so they say, no, none of that. So you say, okay, all right. So you find a way to mix them in, you know, all sorts of just decisions, strategic decisions that you don't think about,
Right.
when you are farming. And So I had no idea that I was getting a business education in the middle of rural Australia. It was just part of life, you know.
Right.
You know, the trucking company calls and says that, you know, Bill, the Dutch truck driver that you know can't read, that is illiterate, for example, who, you know, knows how to get to your house by navigating all these different ways, that he hasn't slept for 3 days, and so he is not to be loaded tonight. You would have dinner with him and make sure he sleeps in the truck, right? You know, all of these things.
Well, you know, one thing is you said it was kind of striking to me. Well, 800 acres. I mean, I grew up on a cattle ranch, so I
Oh,
have a little perspective. But it was, certainly wasn't 800 acres. And the other thing you mentioned is you know, going to school, and it was an hour and a half
mhm.
bus ride, and I imagine that's, you know, hour and a half there, hour and a half back. Is that
Oh,
right?
yeah. Plus the
Wow.
bike ride to get to the bus, right?
So plenty of time to think
Yeah.
and studies on the bus. Is that where you did your homework?
Well, no, it was too bumpy.
Oh
I
yeah.
actually got motion sickness, so I don't. I would have read to the extent that I could have. You know, the bus was quite full. When I was a kid, the bus was quite full too.
Mm.
So there are a lot of people on to talk about it. I think, you know, technically it took 60 kids, but by the time it got there to school, it was standing room only. But, you know, so there was a lot of people to talk to. And that was where your social life was,
Hmm.
because there was no social life other than at
Yeah.
school or on the bus. So, no, I didn't do my homework on the bus.
So yes. So tell me what brought you from that rural environment to
Mhm.
McKinsey? What was the transition there?
It was in a few steps. So I started out as a kindergarten teacher because honestly, I wanted to escape the farm.
Mm.
And I just was the only thing I knew. I was a fourth generation teacher on my mother's side. So it's like, well, I'm going to do that because there's no question that I'll be able to do it. And so I did that and very quickly worked out, like within the first term of study, that this wasn't what I should have done. But my dad sort of said, look, you finished what you started. So too bad, finish.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I got a job teaching in a boys' school in Melbourne, Australia, which, you know, predictably didn't go as well as I would have liked. And, you know, I jumped ship and just wanted to do, I was happy to do anything really that would pay my rent, to give
Mm.
me a bit of time to work out, well, what is it like to live in a city and how do you navigate that, right? And I was sort of on my own in a big city in Melbourne. So, anyway, long story short, I married young, and my husband was in banking and was in consulting, but wanted to be in banking. So
Yeah.
we moved to Hong Kong when we were in our mid-20s. And I had jumped into corporate communication when I made that jump, you know, and I was just really doing anything I could. I worked as a secretary. And they said to me, look, you need to go back to school. I went, okay, what do I study? They said, well, you can write, study that. Okay, so I studied that.
Mm.
And, you know, got to Hong Kong and working in a communication sort of role in a PR firm, hating it, really
Mm.
hating it. And anyway, Andrew saw a job advertised at McKinsey,
Mm.
and he saw it and went, oh, that'd be fun. And he looked at it and went, oh, no, I think that's for you. It was a communication specialist role.
Wow.
And I looked at the ad, and I sort of had this really great feeling about, oh, I think that's my job, you know. But I said, what's McKinsey? What's management consulting? I've got no idea, right?
Mm.
And he explained. I thought, oh, that sounds fun. And so I went for the interview, and, you know, it's a process. You know, I met one of my dearest friends in the interview queue, you know, because we're all going through the many steps that you
Right.
go through to get in to McKinsey. And, you know, Teresa and I met, and her take on it that she relays back is, oh, they're going to hire two. My takeaway was, oh, I'm sunk, right? They hired two.
Yeah. Nice.
So she went to Beijing and I went to Hong Kong. So I sort of got in that way and was a communication specialist in the Hong Kong office for about 3 years. Moved to New York, 6 months pregnant with a 1-year-old, and a full-time job offer with them, which, given Andrew was traveling 5 days a week, I thought was probably not the time to
Mm.
take, you know, with under two.
Yeah.
So, you know, I took the freelance route pretty soon after that and freelanced for them for about 15 years, which then gave me the opportunity to build my own practice and start doing my own things, but focusing very much on the technique that I learned at McKinsey and then applying it in a corporate setting. So McKinsey uses a technique called structured thinking for solving problems and for communicating. And the work that they talk about is very much in a consulting context. How do you tell the answer to the client when we've done some analysis? And that's terribly useful. But there's more to it, I think, when you're communicating inside a corporate environment. And whether you are writing an email or whether you are presenting to your board, the techniques are broadly the same. The depth of effort is very different. So I think, as I've worked more and more, a little bit in consulting still, but more in corporate environments, just helping people apply these fantastic techniques in that corporate setting has been a lot of fun.
Mm. And I imagine that some of that experience is what's driven you to write your two books, Elevate and Engage. Can you tell us about the difference between those two books and who they're directed towards?
So they come in a way as a set. So Elevate is for leaders, because I think leaders often underestimate the value they bring to their team when the team is preparing a communication. They're often the ones who are spending their nights and weekends rewriting their team's communication. And, a client described to me yesterday that she feels like she's an ambulance driver. She's just triaging all the time, and she's thinking and lying awake thinking, is that communication minimum viable or not? Can we get away with it? Or is there some sort of bomb hiding in it that's going to come back and cause us trouble? So I think, knowing how to shift the burden back on the team by leading early on in the process, if you like, of preparing a significant communication is really important. So I drafted Elevate for leaders who want to do that, to get their nights and weekends back and set their teams up to really flourish, so that everyone can flourish a bit more. And so that's the leader side. And then Engage is the side for the team member who is actually drafting the communication. And so it goes deeper into things like understanding stakeholders and boards, like how, examples, providing case studies for the 10 communication patterns that I offer, and going into them in a lot more depth rather than explaining how they work and just showcasing the 10 patterns at a high level, going a lot deeper with that so that people who are doing the work can really picture and see how it comes together. The leaders book also includes ideas for, building the team skills. How do you actually coach them? How do you maybe run a workshop to teach them the basics so that they can then do it, or what have you? So trying to create a new operating rhythm.
I think one of the biggest challenges we have, especially in what we do, is that it's a complex topic, compensation, very analytical, very number intense.
Yes.
And we're very comfortable with it, of course, but it's then how do you package it and present it to leaders so they get it without saying, without them getting overwhelmed.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the thing is to connect the numbers, if you like, to the commercial reality, isn't it? That the company or the client finds themselves in. And so if you're thinking about it from a leadership standpoint, the 4 steps that I offer in Elevate are, I use RISE as my acronym, but first of all, ready the team around the strategy. And so where it's you writing for someone and you don't have a leader briefing you so much, you're doing the same thing, but you're thinking about, well, what is the outcome I need from whom? And you're getting very, very specific about that, mapping your stakeholders and working out who, in your case, on the client side, would be the actual decision maker, or maybe there's a couple, who would be the powerful influencers. What's going on in their minds? Why do they care about the research that you've done into remuneration or whatever the topic is? And really getting into, well, are they going to be excited by the proposition that I'm putting forward, or is this going to be a really hard pill to swallow? And if it's a hard pill, why? Why is it? And getting very, very deep in understanding very specifically what you need to overcome, what you need to address, so that you can target your messaging in a very commercial way, that hits the business need rather than just says, hey, here's what we found. So getting ready and doing that thinking first feels like it's taking a lot of time, because you're not actually writing the document. You're not putting anything on, well, you are putting things on paper, but for yourself. Right? And I think a lot of people dive into the writing to write for themselves, because they need to clarify for themselves what they're actually saying. And then they forget that they were writing for themselves, and they give it to their audience, and their audience goes, well, what's that? So pushing yourself and your team to really, and it helps to do this piece collaboratively for really significant communications, just much faster. Work that out, who really matters and what do we need from them. So do that. And then the team would draft, hopefully, using one of my patterns. I've got a little tool that I'll show you. I'll put up on the screen here. It's a decision tree to help people work out, which of 10 patterns. There's a lot on that, I know, but you can't tell anything from it, but it's a decision tree. You work your way through it. Once you've worked out that statement, the outcome that you need, then you can pick a pattern and populate your messaging. And I encourage people to do it as a one-pager, a highly structured one-pager with a short introduction, not screens of background, a really short introduction, one single message, and then 2 to 5 supporting points, organized one of 2 ways, either as a grouping or a deductive structure using logic. So the team would do that. And then the leader's role comes into play again. Let's iterate around that messaging. And because it's on a one-pager, it's really easy to see the flaws in the thinking or the strengths in the thinking, right? Whereas when you send up a draft PowerPoint or a draft paper report to your manager and say, okay, or your colleague, can you just take a look at this for me? What happens is they open it up and they take a look and they go, oh, there's lots of great stuff here, but I need a good window of time to do this justice. And that's really hard to find for everybody, because we're back to back with meetings and it's busy. And so they park it and they park it and they park it until it becomes urgent, which from a leadership standpoint is where the real pickle comes, because it's 2 days before you've got to submit it for the steering committee or the board. And you think, oh, I've really got to look at Mary's paper now. So you get it out and you have a look, and you end up rewriting it because you don't have time to go back to Mary to say, hey, Mary, what were you thinking about this? Or did you have that? You might go back to Mary to get some extra numbers or something, but broadly, you've got to rework it yourself. You've put yourself in a corner. And so if you send that draft as a one-pager, you can open it and go, oh, okay, great. I can see what Mary's doing here. Maybe I need to come back to that, but I can do it in an achievable amount of time, right? I can do it in maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30, but really quickly. And I can flick it back to Mary and say, Mary, looks amazing. Just make these minor adjustments. Or Mary, I think we're on the wrong tram. Let's have another go at that. Here's my thoughts. Can you send me another one-pager? Can you iterate? So you get the chance to intervene really early in a way that is fast and focuses on what matters. It focuses on the messaging, because by asking Mary to draft it as a one-pager that sits not in the way that one of my engineering clients said, on an A2, I think they said A1 or A2 and 4-point font, because I said to them, how are you going, and they said, oh, we've solved your problem of the one-pager. We didn't like it. It was, letter size is just too small. So we decided that, a bigger size and a much smaller font would be fine. It's still one page, right? This is the point.
Yeah.
The point is to crystallize it all into like 10-point font on a single letter or A4 page. And the effort of doing that puts the burden on the communicator, not on the audience.
Right.
Right. So if you're shifting the dynamic, you're pushing the thinking onto the people who should be doing the thinking.
Perfect.
So once that messaging is really clear and you've settled it, so, ready, I'll just sort of recap. If you ready the team, iterate that messaging, then, the document is easy and you can settle the document very quickly by skimming and just making sure that they haven't gone off piste, if you like, to use a skiing term, with the messaging between the message and the document, and then deliver it. And then at the very end, embed. So have a quick discussion and say, what went really well there about our process of working, or what did we learn about the stakeholders? What did we learn about the business needs, the business strategy, all of the things that, affect the communication that we can then feed back in to the process. Again, something that people just forget to do because they're busy. They move on.
Right. And so once again, it's rise, it's ready, iterate, settle and then embed.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, a lot of times we write materials to get a certain type of outcome. Right? And so can we go through the different types of outcomes and maybe how our approach may differ for each?
Absolutely. So I think one that's too common, is I want to update my audience, right? There's no outcome there, right? And so one of the things I really encourage people to do is drill into, okay, so I want them to understand. They might say, okay, well, I want to update them because they need to understand this or they need to know this. And so you say, why? And become like a toddler, keep going. Why?
Yeah.
Until you get to the real reason. Oh, so they can execute on blah, blah, blah. So they can whatever. So understand and know are valid, but only in, I think, a limited set of circumstances. If you have somebody needs to understand or know something, they might need to understand a plan. So you'd have a series of steps. I call that my Nike pattern. They might need to understand some findings that you've had from your research. So Howard, in your point, when you're talking about some REM work that you've been doing and you've got some numbers and you need to share that, maybe I'm making a guess here, but maybe, what a typical CFO is paid in their industry for their company size or something like that. Then you might be going back with what I call my nugget pattern, which is, the pay band for a CFO in this size tech startup would be between X and Y. And here's why that's true. Here's the evidence, if you like. So I call that nugget. So those two are pretty easy. They're a main message which summarizes everything, and then a small number of supporting points to, back it up. So they're easy. Where it gets more interesting is where you have an action like, I need them to endorse, I need them to agree, I need them to decide. When you're talking about things like strategies, and maybe you need to weave options into the discussion, options for the best way to deliver your recommendation, options for the best approach broadly. We should go to Hong Kong or we should move to Japan versus how do we do that? So you might have options on either one of those. So that's where it gets much more interesting. And we have a mix of the two forms that I described, which I understand are a bit abstract unless people have come out of the consulting world. I call it a grouping. Some people call it inductive, which is a list of points, like a list of actions or a list of reasons, or deductive, where you're building a case.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really fun, because how do you really describe why something really is the right thing to do? And that's where we have a heap of patterns. I've got my tent here, which I know looks alarmingly busy, on the screen, but, is useful, I guess. You might, for example, have a pattern which I call golden, which is my favorite. I don't get to use it very often, I don't think, because when you're persuading, often you need to be a little stronger. But, this is an opportunity which is really exciting. You're introducing something new that they don't know about. We have an opportunity to expand our market size or attract new customers, something, opportunity to do something better. and this is the best way to capture it. So let's do this. That's a really positive, upbeat story that everyone loves to tell that story. And sometimes you want to turn a situation into an opportunity, and that can be done to an extent. But, if you are putting lipstick on a pig, it's better not, because you lose your credibility. So it's to be used only when it is a genuine opportunity, I think. But the opposite of that is much stronger and, very direct and quite engaging, but not to be overused, I think. And I call it oh dear, where you say, okay, we've got a problem, everybody. This is the problem. Let me explain to you why it really is a problem. I know you don't know about this, but, let me explain why we're in a world of trouble here. And so you sort of get their attention by doing that. And however, good news, there's a solution. And here's why our solution is the right solution. Therefore, we recommend implementing this plan to, pull it together. So, there are two examples, if you like, the strategies. So it really depends on the outcome, yes, but also the context that you're in. And so if we sort of think of the process that I gave you there around RISE, ready, iterate, settle, embed. So when you're getting ready, you're thinking about the outcome you're looking for, but you're also really diving into the issues. And that helps you connect then which pattern you might want, because you can, if it's a decision you need, okay, you've got a series of options that are around strategies and so on, but then do you need to discuss options or not? If you just sort of look at the patterns, you can fairly easily, think, well, that one looks like it feels right. So I'll color that in and see if that works. And sometimes then you get to a place where you say, okay, well, it's not quite working. I'm fighting with the pattern. I need to fit within the confines of the structure. That's part of the deal, because the structure puts you, helps you think. So, okay, well, I'll try another one rather than starting from scratch. Yeah. I
see. So it's really playing with different options to see what is going to be most impactful.
Right? But guided by a decision tree to help you pick a promising prospect rather than, where do I go? I don't know, from starting from anywhere, if you like.
And so I know a lot of our listeners are going to be saying, I'd love to see this decision tree to help me guide through this process. Is that something that's in your book as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I call it the pattern picker, right? Where you connect that strategic thought around what is the outcome I need from this communication. And then it'll direct you towards some options and ask you some more questions. And then, you go through and say, okay, I'll try that one. Or it gives you a couple to try.
Great. Well, I know we started here, talking about, preparing some of these materials for some high-level audiences, such as board of directors and so forth. But can you tell me, how does communication differ from what our teams provide to general audience, such as employees across the organization, versus preparing something for the board?
So if you're thinking perhaps about a town hall or something like that, if you're speaking to everybody, or perhaps an email that's going out like here's the strategy, or some sort of announcement, if you like. Is that what you mean?
Right. So specifically, the first thing is, what is the difference that we need to have in the mindset when communicating to a general employee audience versus a board of directors?
Beautiful. So I think, first of all, you're going to be thinking about the outcome you want. In both situations, you're going to be thinking about the outcome you want. And when you're thinking about your stakeholders, you're going to be generalizing more with the broader audience, because you're not able to say, well, I'm speaking just to Mary and Bill. I'm speaking to 100 or 1,000 people. So you can only generalize by group. So you'd be wanting to really think about the issues that really matter and what objections they might have to what you're saying, or what might excite them about what you're saying. And really, is it that you need to get them on board with a new way forward? Is it that actually they've not been doing what you want them to do, and you've got to really, G them up and get them more engaged in something that you think really matters? And you think, why are they not doing, performing at the level? Why do they seem disengaged? Why are they, focusing on Japan versus Hong Kong, whatever the thing. And so once you understand that, then I think you can draft your story, structuring it using exactly the same principles. I think when you are doing something to a big, broader audience like that, you often need to certainly be clear and be structured. That to me is baseline. But I think because the audience is bigger and the stakes are higher in a way, you need also to layer onto that structure more personal story, more emotion. You need to be much more conscious of that. So, for example, you might begin with something that they can relate to that's not a fact, but is a story, And I'll use one example that I use that I don't know if it would. Okay. You could say, for example, if you're speaking to a warehouse, group of people in a warehouse, our delivery performance has really fallen over the last 6 months. Too many people are not receiving what they ordered. You could say that. That's factual. Or you can say, okay, people, last week Ned from Nebraska was on the phone again, and he explained for the 4th time this month he received tea bags instead of televisions. It's much more personal, isn't it? Same thing. Sure. Same thing, but a much more engaging way to hook your audience in at the very opening, probably telling them something that they knew, something familiar, but, oh, ouch, I really feel for Ned. You're making it much more personal. And so I think you want a lot more of that woven into your structure to really engage a very big audience. You need to make it very relatable. And that's much more important, much more concrete, rather than a decision-making audience, which I think appreciates that also. But I think they're much more open to, okay, what's going on here? And okay, what do we need? And they think more conceptually often too. I think you can be confident that a senior decision-making audience can think more conceptually, because it's just part of a job, a senior job. You've got to think strategically. It's part of the criteria for a senior role, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas a broader audience, some people will be analytical and, not necessarily engage with that conceptual thinking as much, and some people will. So everyone can understand Ned from Nebraska being a bit cross about his
do you need more repetition when you're talking to a broader audience?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think that's a really good point. Yes, I think you do. I think you need to invest a lot more time in the presentation of the idea in terms of the way you're crafting it, and things like alliteration as well, or having an acronym, or having memorable slogans that are short and catchy. You need to invest a lot more into those aspects of, I call it them, the fine-tuning sorts of aspects that I think, if you weigh up where the value is, if you're communicating to get a decision about something pretty regular from a board or a steering committee or whatever, you're not going to go to that level because you just want to get the thing moving. Whereas when you're communicating to a big group, that you need to get them motivated, you need to get them moving forward, and it's action oriented, and you need like combined momentum, sustained and combined momentum. You absolutely have to invest a lot more in that. Yeah. The artistry of it, if you like. It takes a lot more time to do that.
So in short, you mentioned as far as in the broad audience, I mean, you need to understand your demographic and what are their main concerns. Use storytelling to really help engage them in the conversation. And with the boards, it seems like you take a deeper dive in understanding each individual member of the board, where they're coming from, and then be higher level. Make sure that you're really pointed on what you're expecting out of that engagement and so forth, being very directed.
Yeah, I think you just have to group people when you've got a big audience to, so you can generalize a bit. Yeah.
So I know we've spoken a lot about the Elevate book, and now if we dive into the Engage piece and how we get our team members in to develop this wonderful communication material. I mean, can you take us through that journey?
Absolutely. So if we think of RISE, the leaders process, if I think of two, for those watching on video, two lines, if you like, time going across, and you've got the leader at one level and the team sitting, at another level. And so what you have then is when the leader is getting everybody ready, the team member has a role to play. And so I use 5 Fs for this one down below. Some alliteration, a bit of repetition there, Howard, to help with that, right? And so we have, when the leader's getting you ready, your job as a team member is to help flush out that strategy. It's not all on the leader. It's about you helping them clarify what the outcome is needed for this communication, because you have value to bring as well. So firstly, flush out the strategy. And if you're working on an email for something that's simple, you're using the same thing. You might just take a heartbeat, jot something down on a notepad and say, well, what do I really need from this audience for this email? If it's something significant, you're working with your leader to flush that out. And then once that's clear enough to you, you will frame up your messaging. And you use a pattern to do that. I've got the decision tree to help people, the pattern picker to help people work out which one might be useful here, so that they can start mocking it up using a pattern and then fill it in. And so you want to finalize that messaging in concert with your leader as they, iterating it with them. So you're finalizing it, firming it up as that one pager so that it becomes crystal clear. So it's logical, it's engaging, it's clear, it's insightful, all of those things. So once that messaging is really clear, then you would flip it into document format, because most likely you're the person doing the legwork on it. So you would convert it, flip it into a PowerPoint or a Google Doc or whatever the tool is that you're using. You might be working within a template too, which can be, an extra step that you need to take that can be challenging. People often start writing in a template, which I think is tricky. I think it's better to start with the messaging. So you flip it there, and then finally you feed back and feed forward. So you're saying, okay, what did we learn from that? What went well? What did not? And I think as an individual contributor, you can drive this process as much as your leader can, and often you need to. If it's a fairly routine communication, it's, an update, for example, that you do every week, every month, you might be driving it, but you might think, actually, this one's special. I need to involve my leader. I need to get them involved because they don't realize quite how special this one is. And we don't just need to tell them everything's awesome here, because actually it's not, or we need some help to get things moving forward, or we need extra resources or something. So I think even though there's a leader's role and a team member's role, the team member can absolutely drive the process where they need to, and often they will need to.
I see. And so once again, the framework of the 5 Fs is flush it out. Make sure your
strategy, the communication strategy. Yes.
Right. Make sure you put a frame around the messaging.
Yes.
And then fill it in.
Yes.
So
yes.
Go into the details.
Yep.
And then firm up those details. Is that right?
Or firm up the messaging. Yes.
Yeah.
In the one pager, and then flip it into a document.
A document, and then get feedback on that material
after it's done. So imagine after it's delivered, after it's presented, that sort of final, just close the loop. What did we learn here?
Yes, and then let's, if we wouldn't mind, just diving into the element of getting feedback, because I think that's quite important, and it's often left out in a lot of communications. So can you walk us through what that looks like?
Absolutely. I think for the most part, it's going to be a quick conversation, either in a one-on-one, or if a team's involved in collaboratively writing something, then it might be in the team meeting. But it's just as simple as, okay, how did that go? Did we get the outcome we wanted? Did we need to iterate madly at the last minute? Did we get the decision we wanted first time?
Mm-hmm.
Was the conversation substantive in that decision-making forum? Or was it everyone trying to say, okay, thanks for the doc, but can you explain to me? Can you clarify? Was it lots of that? Or was it, oh, cool, so how can we do this? That looks great. What was the tenor of that conversation? Was it really good quality? If it's lots of clarification, then you missed the mark. What can we do better next time? So what did we learn about where the stakeholders are at? Have they shifted their perspectives at all, or did we learn something really useful about how they're thinking about the strategy for our area or what matters for our area? And then just process, okay, did we actually do the thing, right? Did we really? Did we think about our strategy early, or did we shoehorn ourselves into a corner at the end? Did we do the one-page message map? Was it really well architected? Did we actually do the peer review on it before you sent it to me? Did you do everything you could as a team to protect the leader by peer reviewing that messaging before sending it up?
Right. So peer review, specifically, having other team members go through the material, perhaps using a trusted advisor to have them look at that. Maybe a person on the what I often see is if there's a close relationship with somebody on the board that you can trust, you can kind of bounce it off them.
Absolutely. That absolutely. And I think too, in some ways people might think, gosh, this sounds like a lot of work for around a piece of communication. But if I give an analogy here just to explain how it can really help, we find it cuts the amount of time everybody takes in preparing the communication quite materially. And I think lawyers who count their time in 6-minute units are a really great example for that.
Yeah.
So a long time ago, I was teaching lawyers how to get to the point, how to get their advice across in 30 seconds. And it's a common response, right? Because the law's really complicated, and there's a lot behind that. But anyway, we were doing that. And so I worked with a small office. It was part of a bigger firm, and I was rotating around the whole firm. And so I went to this office, and then I wasn't going to be back to that office again for a year because they didn't have that many new hires or what have you. So I'd just been, and 2 new senior associates were hired. And they said, well, we can see that everyone communicates here very differently than the way lawyers are taught to communicate, which is to describe their problem-solving journey, then ta-da at the end, which is really common, in technical communication. And so we've got to do something about this because that woman, she's not back for a long time. What are we going to do? Yeah. So they said, well, we'll read through the materials. We'll get a briefing from some people who've been through the training, and we better buddy up or we're just going to die here because we've got no idea what we're doing. And so they said, okay, we're going to commit for a month to get to the whiteboard and map out the messaging for every advice we write until we feel like we really understand this and we can actually do this. Otherwise, we're in trouble. So they did that. And they said very quickly, they realized they were cutting the amount of time. Even, they're reciprocating. And that's the important piece here. You've got to be reciprocating. They were cutting the time it took to draft their advices massively. So, lawyers who count their time in 6-minute units are pretty aware of the time shift. And so anecdotally, bringing forward the thinking, which is what this is all about, bringing the thinking piece early on into the process and focusing on the messaging first. It's the right kind of hard, but it's usually much faster. If you think of beginning the process to start writing through to getting a decision. Right. Don't think about it as beginning writing to hitting send on the document. Think of it as getting the decision. If you think about that as the time space, you will cut the time significantly.
Great. Well, I know we're coming up on our time here, Davina, but one final question. So how is artificial intelligence changing the game of communication?
I think it's doing a few things. I think it's helpful for summarizing information that it's given. And I think that speeds up the process a bit because it's clear, it's easier to work out what the data is. What it can't do, though, is really important. It can't yet, at least, connect the information, the facts, the data, to the commercial reality. It can give you ideas, which I think is very powerful. But it also, I'm finding, isn't what I call messy. So it doesn't always organize ideas in a way that means that there's no gaps and no overlaps, or the ideas are, in consulting speak, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So if you look at them, it gives you ideas, that's great. It summarizes, that's great. But it doesn't add the insight, it doesn't add the value. So I think be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful. It can't do your job for you, thank goodness.
Yes.
But you know, it can help you quite a lot. Yeah.
So tell me, Davina, I mean, what is the next thing that you're looking forward to in 2025? What are the big things you're working on?
Oh, that's a really good question, and something I'm thinking about a lot this week. I think, honestly, having moved countries a year and a bit ago and delivered 2 books in the last 12 months and maintained, you know, hit my revenue target, I'm just relieved. But in terms of next year, I think I'm really keen to button up or sort of knuckle down on, you know, the leaders, working with the leaders so much more and helping them set their teams up to succeed. And exactly how that plays out, I'm not sure. So you've caught me with a question that I'm not quite ready to answer yet, but I'm excited. I'm excited about, you know, taking it forward. I just haven't had the time to think, which I need.
Yes, well, hopefully the holidays will provide such relief for you, so to dive deep into that. But many of our leaders out there right now are thinking about, how can I learn more about these two, elevate and engage. So what would you say to them?
Well, I think they can come to my website, clarityfirstprogram.com, to learn more about the books specifically. And if they want a really quick dive into, well, how does this stuff work in practice, then I have a 10 minutes to better emails course, which they can sign up for at clarityfirstprogram.com/emails. Or if they're thinking, actually, I'd like to work with her just to test this out and see how it goes, I offer a program called the Board Paper Bootcamp, and I'll be running that again in May 2025 on a platform called Maven. You can find out all about it at my website. That's perhaps a few different ideas that people can explore.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. This is very helpful to me because, of course, we Howard and I we often are working with our teams to deliver very clear communication. So I really appreciate your time and helping us with this.
No, my pleasure. Great to talk to you both.
Have a great holiday.
Yes.
You too.
Restful. Hopefully.
The same to all our listeners out there. You take care, and we'll see you. We're coming on next year. I think we do have a holiday episode that is coming out that's pre-recorded, but our next live event is next year. So we will see you soon. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful